we have a lot changing in our world, but it's just a constant evolution.
You have business requirements that drive choices from an application standpoint, and those applications need infrastructure. That hasn't changed. It won't change.
We're definitely unleashed a beast. It disrupted a lot of people's businesses.
For me, going forward, the story isn't about VMware, it's about what we've learned from that situation.
Geopolitical and economic disruptions, talent challenges, emerging technology, and changing cybersecurity landscape. In the episode today, we will discuss the IaaS market reset, which we will see in 2026, starting from strategic reset and companies being reactive to companies being proactive. Welcome to the first episode of Open Infra Conversations by ShapeBlue. Welcome everybody, and thank you very much for agreeing to participate in our first episode of the podcast Open Infra Conversations with ShapeBlue.
And I'm John White, CEO at US Signal. I've been in the infrastructure cloud space for pretty much my whole life and helped lead the team of product strategy team, delivery, R&D, all that fun stuff. So I've been in the cloud since it was called cloud.
And I'm pretty much the same. I'm Giles Sirett. I'm CEO of ShapeBlue. We build infrastructures for customers based on Apache Cloud Stack, whether they're service provider focused businesses or enterprise-based businesses. Like John, I've been around cloud since not quite my whole career, but I'm probably a few years older than John. But for a long time.
Pat Cannon, I'm a field CTO with US Signal. So we spend a lot of time in the field talking with customers about their infrastructure choices and strategies.
I'm very happy that we have three quite interesting guest speakers today, and I'm Yvette Petrova, Marketing Director at ShapeBlue and your host and moderator for today's talk. Okay, so according to Gartner and their IT Symposium, 2026 is a year of infrastructure as a service IT reset. Do you consider that's true, and what do you think is the driving force behind the reset of IT in 2026?
A reset as opposed to just an evolution, I guess, that's the point of what Gartner are saying.
I can't agree with anything that Gartner says, so I can't go with that. I mean, they always want to look for a single-sided solution for everything. I remember probably 2016 and rolling out a new cloud product, and they're like, "Oh my God, your business is going to die because everybody's going to AWS." So they're always looking for a 1 or a 0. We're in a constant evolution. Like it's like the tides. I mean, we go through this centralization, this decentralization phase, and we're just inside of this thing. And I think it's just another assurance that if you're not thinking through a hybrid landscape, then you're not thinking along the right way. So if you're saying, okay, it's only going to be cloud or it's only going to be on premises, like that's the problem. That's the part that's wrong right now. And I think that's where Gartner wants to always say, okay, we're in this reset phase where we're going to go all back to on-premises now because we have AI, we capital's tough. And I just don't think that's going to be the case.
Yeah, I agree with that comment. In the last sort of 12, 18 months, multiple sort of foundational assumptions have changed, right? So you get right at the bottom, businesses have got less access to, cheap capital. We've had the concept of important vendors, trusted important vendors suddenly being removed. We've got geopolitical landscape is a very different place to it was a couple of years ago. People are understanding, the business models of some of the big IaaS providers, the big hyperscalers. So you got all these assumptions all changing. I'd say, yeah, we're definitely in a reset phase.
I would thread the needle between both of those responses. I think if you think about the mindset of decisions that people are making, it's both an evolution of what we've learned, right? So, if you take a simple concept, John kind of alluded to it, of lifting and shifting to, say, a hyperscaler and, not performing any further modernization of those workloads and seeing costs rise over time. I think that simple concept forces us to then kind of reset, from a mindset perspective as to how we look at our decisions in the future. So I think it's a little of both, and that's what I see customers kind of iterating over is, okay, we've been down one path. It was not optimal for us. So if we look at a strategy to repatriate, what makes the most sense for us, and hopefully organizations are looking at that, from a workload by workload perspective as opposed to just an all-in infrastructure choice.
It's nice you've got that balanced view, Pat, somewhere in between me and John, and it is unusual for me to agree with Gartner as well. But I still do the thing. I mean, yeah, the term reset. We've got so many evolutions occurring at the same time. I think that's the point I'm trying to make. That do 5 or 6 significant evolutionary things all actually mean, yeah, no, this is a reset period. And I suppose a lot of it is from first-hand experience.
Instead of reset, should we call it more of an enlightenment, that like people realize there's other options out there? Because I think that's really what's going on, is they realize, hey, it's not just, a single place that you're going to live.
Yeah. A cloud epiphany.
Exactly. Right.
On that with you.
So you're all aligned around that. Okay. And John, you mentioned something about cloud and on-premise. In the infrastructure space, is it still about on-premise versus cloud, or it's hybrid now, the default architecture which you're seeing with customers?
I think people are still warming up to the concept of hybrid, and it's one of those things where they were so used to, like, they had tunnel vision on, okay, we're on-prem now. Gartner says that's bad. People say that's bad because of X, Y, and Z. So let's move to the cloud. So we moved to the cloud, but that doesn't really work. And so they're finally realizing, oh my God, people that were actually saying, hybrid is the future is really the future. And then I think when you start to look at, the cost of cloud, that being an issue for some people, and not saying that cloud's bad, but a lot of people misuse it. So if you misuse anything, it's typically going to be expensive or not what you're looking for. And I think people are finally realizing, okay, if the costs are higher and maybe my workloads aren't really set for it, maybe I should start to repatriate a little bit or do some on-premises work, or own some of the hardware. And then when you start to look at the balance of, okay, I have a manufacturing company or a healthcare company, I have a lot of IoT devices generating a lot of data, I'm going to pay a lot of money in bandwidth, or I could process it locally. That probably makes a little more sense to process it locally. So we're just in that constant, evolution of change.
I think hybrid has been the normal for many years now, okay, at a tactical level, right? But it hasn't necessarily been the strategy of an organization, but actually if you go in and audit these organizations, they've all got significant amounts of on-prem. Even though their CIO strategy has been cloud first for 5 years, they've still got a lot of on-prem, or, their strategy might all be on-prem and they've actually got a lot of hyperscaler stuff that they're using, or other service provider stuff they're using. I think the difference is now is that what was happening down at that tactical level is now getting recognized as a strategy.
I would agree with that. So like there's almost, again, the enlightenment that, we say we're on-prem or we say we're cloud, but you know what? We really are hybrid. So why don't we just call ourselves that, and we figure out the best venue for where our applications need to run.
So how are the organizations approaching edge and distributed infrastructure? Is this like proactive and part of their current strategy, or they're waiting for something to happen and then to say maybe it's time to think for a different strategy?
I'm seeing more people being proactive on it now. They're realizing, hey, we might not have been in the best spot. If VMware was our prime vendor, that's where we're spending our most money, and they can go and turn on a dime, and maybe not support us like we thought we'd have support forever. Like I think people are starting to think, okay, I don't want to be, in that situation again. We're hearing that time and time again. Is like they're just not comfortable having their business, flipped upside down, and it's not their fault. And so I think there's a lot of folks that are trying to, figure out, hey, what's this happy medium? Where can I kind of control my own destiny and have some protection? And, it's not just VMware. I mean, that is, I think, probably the biggest disruptor. But if you look at, AWS increased their price for their first time in years, maybe a decade on one of their products. Why can't that be the norm?
You have business requirements that drive choices from an application standpoint, and those applications need infrastructure. That hasn't changed. It won't change. But as practitioners, we're being forced to adjust to the economics, right? So, to John's point, how do we avoid vendor lock-in? How do we create, more flexibility from a consumption standpoint? And I think all of that, is really interesting in the concept of, what we're talking about here today of, that cloud epiphany, so to speak. And I think we're going to continue to see that organizations that are being proactive, kudos to them. I see, here in the Midwest of the United States, we have a lot of laggard adopters though. So, we're still fighting some of those, basic challenges. But, I think a lot of it's the economics that are driving some of those decisions.
Yeah, and I think specifically with the edge piece, a few years back, Edge was, it was almost a reaction at the time. Almost, in our heads, it was often just a bolt on to the core processing that was always happening in data centers. But it's definitely becoming a strategy now. Data doesn't like moving, right? And people are sort of designing more distributed edge-based environments from day one. We certainly not still it's not the mainstay of what we do here. The mainstay is still data center. We see the percentage of that increasing. AI inference, large data sets not wanting to move. I think the fact that data likes to be where it likes to be, and therefore the processing should happen there. We're just going to see edge becoming sort of front and center of a lot of people's strategies.
Should we all agree then that the new normal is hybrid and edge infrastructure?
I think for most people, it should be hybrid. The edge is going to be relative to what your business is. I think there's still, if you're generating data locally, then yes, you need some sort of edge. If that's not what you're doing, then I agree. You're probably a little far off to actually needing the edge.
Okay, so both John and Pat, you mentioned a few words about VMware. I was about to ask, what are the biggest forces which are driving that evolution and change in 2026? Is it geopolitics, is it economics, or just like the whole wave which VMware has unlocked about a year and a half ago?
I think that's, VMware definitely unleashed a beast. It disrupted a lot of people's businesses. It disrupted our business. I think that was, that's been heard throughout the industry. Now, I think people are starting to sober up on the concept. It was like, okay, maybe it's not as bad as we thought it was going to be, and we're just going to have to take it and do it. And I think that there's a portion of people that are going that way, and then there's another portion of people that are like, what, this isn't for us long term. We need to figure out a better solution. So I don't think that's going to be just VMware in the future. I do believe that we're going to start to see that other places with not only just increasing in prices, but like security issues in certain cloud environments, or you look at CrowdStrike. It's funny. CrowdStrike was like the top of everybody's topic list for a while, and then it fell off. But like if that continues to happen or happens again with a CrowdStrike like company, we're going to have major issues.
I think I'm sort of agreeing with you there, Joe. From my perspective, the VMware story is sort of played through. It's got a long tail because there's a lot of people doing a lot of work addressing infrastructures that were based on VMware, and they're not anymore. But for me going forward, the story isn't about VMware. It's about what we've learned from that situation, right? Having dependency on vendors or other providers without a clear exit plan is a business continuity issue. VMware isn't necessarily going to be the big headliner the next year, but I think what we've all learned in IT and infrastructure leadership from that episode has probably changed some of our behaviors forever, right?
I think the evolution of like AI tools to help kind of code your own destiny as well is going to be a big issue.
Yeah, I think that retooling concept is super important. We're working with a large healthcare provider right now that's been on VMware for a very long time, and the team is evaluating other platforms, and they're very stuck on comparing it to how VMware works, right? And simple concepts like mimicking permissions, which you know we have an open cloud offering that's based on Cloud Stack and KVM, and there's plenty of tools that you could plug in to essentially create the same results. So that retooling and just reshaping of talent, I think right now is perceived as a blocker to a lot of these organizations that are doing those evaluations. But I'm hopeful that to John's point, we'll see wide adoption and more open mindsets that will allow us to innovate quicker, and not be dependent on platforms like VMware and avoid more vendor lock-in in the future.
And to close the topic for the VMware and then jump on another hot topic, which obviously is AI and building AI-ready infrastructure, what do you think about the future of VMware? Is it a short-term necessity or a long-term risk?
I don't see VMware going anywhere.
Both.
VMware could be the mainframe where it's just sitting there and living and running forever because people know it and love it. I mean, mainframes are fantastic pieces of machinery that do run, and they will run for a long, long time. I think we're going to have those in our life forever, but they're a pain in the butt, and they're a very specific type of engineer that wants to run those. And I feel like VMware and closed source systems are going to become the one way of the mainframe, and open source is going to be, where everything's going to be built in the future.
Yep. So
that's gonna be a soundbite that might come back and bite me, but we'll see.
yeah, I think it's both as well. What I'm seeing from customers, some of them have applications that have to run on certified infrastructure. So again, if you're taking that mindset of, okay, what's the most optimal place to run a specific application or a workload, right? Let's make sure it gets us the performance that we need. It doesn't increase our operational burden. It meets our security and compliance, and it's cost effective. So if we take that rationale and we apply it to each workload, inevitably what we're seeing is customers do have workloads that need to stay on VMware. I do think it presents a long-term risk, just because every organization at this point should be pushing for innovation. And if we just keep doing the same things over and over again, that's kind of the antithesis of innovation. So I think it's both. I think it's short-term requirement, long-term risk. To John's point, there's probably always going to be some VMware, somewhere in everyone's architecture. But I think the more that we can diversify and have more optionality, I think those are the organizations that are going to win out in the future.
But I think, Pat, sometimes we live and breathe this world, right? All of us, and sometimes we forget how much that has changed in the last 18 months. Because yes, your customers are there saying, yeah, we're going to still have to do a bit of this with VMware because of whatever. The fact is, you probably wouldn't have even been having that conversation with them 2 years ago, because this layer in their stack was, there's no need to look at that. We buy that from VMware, right? So, it has the simple fact that people are even having those conversations and say, and there's something driving them to say, yeah, we're still going to have a bit of that, but generally we're now looking to de-risk in other areas. That's a huge change.
And you all mentioned open source and the new way of building IT infrastructure. So is this actually the new normal, or open source is still for just a few brave companies which want to ensure building their own destiny?
I've been telling people it needs to become the new normal for 15 years now, right? Open source used to be perceived as the risky option, but working with a vendor who might do crazy things is now perceived as the risky option. So I think there's been a fundamental change in the way people perceive it.
I do see a shift happening, and when I talk to people and we explain, how much maybe open source that they're using today that they don't even know they're using, I think that starts to enlighten them. But I think, again, it's a big scary thing for some engineering folks. But I do believe we are on the precipice of a kind of a changing of the guard, where we start to maybe have these we have kind of our old school engineers, just like, and it's no different like 20 years ago when I came into it. Like you had your mainframe engineers, you had your like server based engineers. We had our server based engineers. Now we had our cloud based engineers. We're going to go from these cloud based engineers, and these server based engineers or virtualization engineers into the next generation of engineering that are using AI tools and open source, and it's a more collaborative community. Like we are on that jump right now.
Yep, agreed. I think the economics of open source are often more beneficial, and if you have an environment where you don't have to sacrifice capability, right? So better economics without sacrificing capability, that's going to be a winning equation.
With open source, I dictate exactly what I need. I dictate exactly what my customers want. I dictate exactly what my employees want. And as soon as people start to realize that, and they realize, oh my God, my dollar could be better used if I develop it myself, or if I work with a partner to develop it for me, that's going to be like, the big boom in the milestone explosion that's going to really change everything.
I think what you're describing there, John, is the perfect open source, perfect consumer user of open source, right? And we are seeing a lot more of that. I think one of the reasons historically there has been some perception issues around the entire concept of open source is a lot of people haven't thought like that. They just say, okay, there's an open source version of this vendor licensed product we used to have. Let's just use that. And as Pat says, the economics is great, right? I'm not paying the license fee anymore. But I think as long as organizations are sensible in their approach and understand that I'm not going to get an infrastructure for free, right? Open source doesn't mean stuff's free. Open source just means I can spend the money in a more targeted way where I want to spend it on the things I want to spend it on. And that might mean having to reskill some people, having to do a little bit of the work that the vendor traditionally spoon-fed to us because this is open source and it doesn't quite look the same. I think as long as people have got that mindset, then it's an absolute win-win.
Talking for AI, is this actually the major shift and the major trend which will shape 2026? What are your expectations?
2026, 2037, 2036. Yeah, this is the biggest, probably the biggest technology shift that I've seen in my career, my lifetime. The internet was big, no doubt, but AI is going to trump it. It's completely changing, businesses, economic models. How we think about work, how we interact. It's going to completely change the economy. This is very similar as the Industrial Revolution.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I guess when you ask the question of that, you're asking from the context of our industry and what have you. And yeah, it's a big driver. Has been already for the last year, or last couple of years. But the societal, economic changes are just, to be frank, almost unfathomable sometimes in terms of, and this is moving so quickly, right? John, you referenced the Industrial Revolution. I don't know what the time frame was then from going from an agricultural society to going to a industrialized society. I'm guessing a decade or two. I think we're going to be talking about a year or two, and then that's going to continue to accelerate, and the pace of change is just going to be phenomenal.
But let's just go a step back. So AI, that's the layer on top. But if we focus on the layer which is below and talk a little bit about building AI-ready infrastructure, what advice will you all give to companies which would like to have IT infrastructure which is AI-ready? What tools they should use and how should they architect it?
I can kind of lead that conversation off. So, I think it is a lot of what we've been talking about here today, right? So trying to position your strategy from a flexibility standpoint and a cost optimization standpoint, because, it's going to cost money, right? There will be investments that have to be made to support those projects. So, thinking through where data is going to need to live for performance reasons or, for compliance reasons. We talk about sovereign cloud, in that context as well. So adopting a hybrid strategy that does include edge, getting the network plumbed to be able to support movement of those workloads, right? So I think it's not a one singular focus. It's a very 50,000 foot view focus that we have to have from a strategy standpoint. So I think that's where I would encourage organizations to spend time right now, right? Is get your house in order. We see a lot of companies doing AI just because AI at this point. I think the organizations that are focusing on the future, trying to put themselves in a position strategically to be more flexible, so that they do have spend and they can take on those projects when they're necessary. I think those are the folks that are doing their homework right now.
It's a level of thinking about data sovereignty that we've never had to think about before, right? It's not just about will this data get into my competitor's hands or into the public domain. It's we're actually teaching somebody else's brain to answer the same questions that we want, and other people are going to get those same answers. And I do agree with you in terms of the larger organizations who have got the budgets to run that themselves. I mean that's the delimiter. But I do think also there is there are a lot of medium-sized businesses who really can't afford to lose that sovereignty of their data that using some of the public models would cause. So I wonder whether in the next few years we're going to see more sort of models as a service being delivered for those smaller organizations who need to act but are really bothered about their data sovereignty. And I think the other side of this for me is looking at it from the whole other perspective. If we look at it from the infrastructure perspective, is the design cycles are getting crazy now. I've got a friend who designs data centers, and he's his cycle for designing a data center, he's now putting in designs for approval which are obsolete by the time they've got them in for approval, because things are racing exponentially, the demand for infrastructure, and I think we're going to see a lot of change over the next year in terms of much more extensibility in terms of power, in terms of scale, in terms of cooling, etc., and that filtering across not just the big people in this world, but filtering across smaller organizations as well.
Small and medium businesses are probably going to use more public-facing AI in the future. Any large enterprise business, if you're not figuring out how you can have your own private AI, your own private models, you're probably behind. Like, I don't know why you would ever want to use public only in those. I think it's going to be a hybrid of public and private models for the foreseeable future. But like for your private data that kind of drives and runs your business, I mean, if you're Coke and Pepsi, you're not going to want to share that same metadata on the back end. You're going to want to build your own, and we're seeing a shift towards that. Already we have a large enterprise. We just built out a big data center space for them to run their own, DGX clusters to do digital twinning of their engineering pieces, and like that's their secret. That's going to be their secret sauce for the future. So every large enterprise, you got to do it. It's going to be a must. You have to have your own private model. I'm assured of that. As anything else, small to medium, you're probably going to use public, but large enterprise, you got to have a private model, at least for the next decade or two.
Okay, as we're approaching towards the end of our conversations, so at ShapeBlue, we're very much focused on helping companies building IT infrastructure with open source. I want to ask all of you if you can give one advice for 2026 for cloud builders, what advice would you give?
Throw out the traditional norms that you think you know. Question everything. Like that, I mean, if you're not questioning everything in this world right now, if you're not sitting there banging around with a AI model, asking questions that you've been thinking about, or you want to contemplate or prototype, you got to do it. Like that's it. I mean, if you're open right now, I think those are the people who are going to win the game.
Yep. I say similar, right? Don't be afraid to explore. I think organizations that adopt open source, US Signal, we're a perfect example of that. We've been a long time cloud provider, based on commercial platforms. but made the choice to move to open source. And I don't think we're not looking back, and our customers are very much open to it. They're very excited about it. So definitely be open to change. It's inevitable. I think open source provides a lot of opportunities to innovate, and I would encourage organizations and service providers specifically to make that jump.
It's nothing new. I've said this to people for a few years, but own your own destiny, right? Which is just building on what John and Pat have said. But I think it's even more important now with the uncertainty, whether we call it evolution, whether we call it, what did we agree on in the end was the name for what's happening at the moment? Not a reset, an epiphany, okay? But own that yourself. Don't let other people make those decisions for you, or they'll end up owning you.
And last question, what is the one infrastructure decision you believe organizations will look back and would say, that's the decision that changed everything?
Stop trying to do it all yourself. Partner.
Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah, the partnership side of it is key. From an education standpoint, from shared services model, I think it'll allow you to. I think anybody right now that is unhitching the wagon to figure out how to move faster, and I think partners will help you move faster. Like that's going to be critical. If you're still moving, at regular server speed, 20 year, the speed that you ran at 20 years ago, you're still doing that today, you are going to be left in the dust.
I would say own your own future, right? Which you could argue is countering what you're saying, John. You're talking about partners, but those two things sit together, right? So own your own future. By all means, work with partners, and that's good with people with high experience. But make sure you've got the right partners, right? The people you can trust. Make sure you've got back out plans, and there's a plan, and you're working with partners who on day one say, look, if anything ever went wrong with us, this is how you would go away from us, right? And a lot of the organizations we deal with do put that front and center, and their customers love that.
Thank you all for participating in the first episode of Open Infra Conversations by ShapeBlue. Be part of the open infrastructure movement towards Apache Cloud Stack. Subscribe to Open Infra Conversations by ShapeBlue, discover the latest technology trends, and shape the future of your business.